Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martin Loffers. I'm the Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, the European quarterly magazine, but also a bi-weekly newsletter and a website, of course. But I'm also the architect of the IT subway map. We'll discuss it later. So I do a lot of analysis of supply chain software in Europe. And we'll talk about it in the next 60 minutes. So we'll have an exciting and interactive live webinar this afternoon, 60-minute webinar, and we're going to discuss the topic of how to create a resilient and AI-ready IT portfolio for supply chain. And that's a hot topic. So next to me, and I will introduce him later, is Peter Schram. Peter Schram, or Peter Schram is Dutch. So he will be introduced right after this. So welcome, Peter.
Great to be here, Martijn.
Yeah. All right. So a few things before we really kick off this conversation. So this webinar will be recorded and will be made available on YouTube. The slides will be made available as PDF within 48 hours, most of the times within 24 hours. So the audience is on mute, but feel free to ask questions along the way. So you see the chat functionality on the right-hand side. It's not ChatGPT, but usual chat. So everybody can answer themselves. And we have a Q&A functionality. So if you want to ask questions to Peter or myself, please use the Q&A functionality on the right-hand side. You see the text bubbles on the right-hand side. So I will ask these questions if they are in line of the things Peter and I am discussing. And, if not, we have a Q&A at the end. So don't worry, so that there's also time to go over there. But after this session at 5 o'clock CET, we will have a 30 minutes after talk. And we'll be sitting down at table 1 in the virtual lounge. Looks like this. Click on table 1 at a chair, and a kind of Zoom meeting will pop up. And then, we'll can have a direct discussion. So if you have questions, feel free to join us there. So as of now, I will put off my camera, and Peter also, so we are live, we're there. So, but basically, you can enlarge your screen so you have a better view on the slides at hand. All right. So, Peter, please introduce yourself. So, and then we get to our topic.
Yeah, thank you, Martijn. So once again, very nice to be here. So my name is Peter Schram, Peter Schram in Dutch. As it says here on the slide, 20 years of experience in supply chain. Worked for companies like DevTrucks and Signify in project and program roles. We also worked in consulting for a big part of my career. Then joined Gartner as a research director. So I did a lot of research related to planning and also advised customers on that. So somewhere ballpark 300 organizations that I've worked with at that time. And then 3 years ago, I decided to start my own advisory. So I help organizations basically on their supply chain transformations and specifically, let's say, on planning transformations. And on top of that, I am a startup advisor at the Plug and Play. Once a year, I also host lectures as TIAs on digital transformation. And I also write articles about startups and, let's say, how to work with startups for Supply Chain Magazine. And that's also a bit, I think, the link on why I'm in the call today. So that's in a nutshell what I am and what I do.
So yeah, so you have a lot of insights in supply chain software, and you have also a lot of insight of startup and scale-up vendors in supply chain planning, and that's where you have written articles about in the last year, actually.
Yeah.
Right. But let's look at the supply chain briefly. And all the supply chain professionals and experts in the audience will all know this. But there are all kind of disruption going on, and it started out in the bottom left at COVID-19 2020, and as a result, you have lockdowns at home, lockdowns of factories. Factories couldn't produce. And you get shortages because of that. But also e-commerce was on the rise, so that was as a result. As of the shortages, you get also an effect of fuel prices going up, but also decline in available product. So you see volatility on the demand side and on the supply side. And on the top, you see already inflation in the last few years. And because of COVID, there was already talk of inflation, but later on, because of the next black swan, the war in Ukraine, February 24th last year. As a result, there was a shortage in gas supply, and inflation was booming. And now still inflation is on the highest level, well, ever, I would say, in our knowledge, since the 80s. And as a result, economies will tend to go into recession if they are not already into recession. And as a result, you see also that e-commerce is declining again, because of stores opening up after COVID lockdowns were ended. So these are the things we all know. But the thing is, why I show this, there are all kind of subsequent ripple effects, and economists are wondering what's happening with inflation, bullwhips, etc. And the GDP is some growing and then declining, and they are started asking why. But if you all know the ripple effects and the bullwhip effects, supply chain professionals will know why this is all happening. It's cause and effect, and it's good to see and to analyze what's happening. So that's what we see. And as a result of that, last year, um, McKinsey and also Gartner wrote about business and supply chain ecosystem that are changing and broadening, and ecosystem competing with each other. So I started thinking, if I Google the phrase business ecosystem, supply chain ecosystem last year, what do I get? And I didn't get anything useful. So I decided to create my own visualization of an ecosystem, and it's looked like this. It's not a linear supply chain anymore. It's like a cloud of all kind of companies, entities, with brand manufacturers in the middle, but also all kind of subcontractors, and downstream you have different kind of customers, and in the gray area you have other stakeholders like bank, investors, NGOs, government, etc. But also in the green area you see called the bio-based raw material supplies coming up. So that's kind of new. And in the brown area you see logistic service providers, and in the bottom in the brown area you see recycling. So it's getting like a supply chain. It's like a circular ecosystem is popping up. And why am I showing this in this? The topic at hand is how to create a resilient supply chain, and also supported with AI and that kind of stuff. You see all kind of arrows. You see flows of goods, but also flows of data, and also flows of money. And basically, if you want to digitalize all this, it's hard to start out where you want to start, and who is willing to participate, etc. Peter, in your point of view, do you also recognize that compared to 10 years ago, supply chains have been changed, and that ecosystems is broader needed, and the importance is larger?
Yeah, yes, for sure. Right? So I think kind of if I would look at supply chain a couple of years ago, I think then kind of also in planning and S&OP, the key kind of focus was kind of optimizing production planning and kind of optimizing the constraints kind of within the walls of your own organization.
Hmm.
But I think kind of the effect of what you showed in the previous slides, that we see now much more constraints kind of not only anymore in the own organization, but also in things which have not traditionally been a constraint. So for example, let's say warehousing. So I'm
Yep.
working on a project where we need to have additional warehouse space, which is just not available anymore. But also, of course, just kind of capacity, supply capacities upstream in the supply chain. And I
Yep.
think kind of one of the key challenges is, so how can we include those constraints, let's say within planning and in supply chain, and how do we find and how do we build the technology to support in that?
Yeah. And if you look at this, we all know that we have to be more sustainable. The ESG regulation, etc., are very important coming up in the next decades. And as you see right here in the green area, you see bio-based raw materials. What I expect for the next 10 years, there will be a real, I wouldn't say war, but a struggle to get your bio-based raw materials, because everybody wants to have bio-based raw materials. So there won't be enough for all the companies in business. So that that you have to compete on bio-based raw materials for one thing. So that's a thing for sure. So that's also why I show this. There will be constraints upstream on the material side, and we all know with chips and the shortages there have been in the last 2-3 years. But these shortages will arise anew, because if we want to digitalize our supply chains, we'll have yeah, we have a need of more chips, etc., but also bio-based materials, and also the recycling stuff. If you want to have a circular business model, you have to be sure that you get enough raw materials, in a circular way, that you are be sure that you get this raw material again in a circular way. So that's why I showed it. So this world is also complexer. And one thing, it's not only your own ecosystem, it's also ecosystem will compete with each other. So in 2021, the automotive in India couldn't produce. Why? Tata Steel couldn't produce. And why was that? Tata Steel didn't get enough oxygen because all the oxygen went to the hospitals. So in that year, you would see that automotive was competing with hospitals. So completely different ecosystem. So you will see shortages, and you have to be aware of that. All right, in the last 2 years, there is IoT analytics. That's a community um, tracking down what CEOs are talking about. And this is how it looks like. And this is the overview of Q4. And basically, what you see here is they track down what CEOs and CEOs are talking about during their calls, their quarterly earning calls of Fortune 500 companies in the US. And it's quite interesting if you track down since 2021 how this is evolving. And as of the last quarter of last year, you still see, and that's highlighted with the red boxes, and before that it was in black, supply chain disruptions, and also supply chain is still a topic, but also reshoring is on the agenda of the CEOs. Okay, labor market, and on the right side you see that's growing interest and more talk about these kind of topics, interest rates and inflation. So these are the topics CEOs are talking about, and you see at the lower end, and that's the declining a bit, shortages. So that's what we see here. But it's interesting to see, this is a Q4 analysis, and this is Q1. So out of nowhere, on the top left, you see ChatGPT popping up, and AI, machine learning, and AI is on the agenda of the CEOs and CFOs in quarterly earning calls. And of course, economic uncertainty is hot, was hot in the first quarter. And what Peter, you mentioned already warehouses. There is a shortage of warehouse space because all the warehouses around the world are stuffed with all kind of inventory, but most of the times the wrong inventory, or that we have produced too many bicycles and demand is going flat, and now we are stuck with all kind of bicycles in our warehouses. So yeah, warehousing is still a topic, and still shortages in products. Um, do you recognize these kind of topics also in your conversations, Peter?
Yeah, for sure. So I think kind of the interesting thing, what we also discussed, Martijn, in our pre-talk, is that somewhere we would have expected that shortages would have come down, let's say over time, because we are coming a bit to a different situation. But if you would look at the previous slide versus this slide, and then shortages seems to become a bigger problem.
Yeah,
And I fully recognize what you are saying. So I think in principle we have an inventory problem, but on top of that we have a mix problem. So
yeah,
meaning that we have a lot of inventory, but still I talk to a lot of customers who cannot produce because they have the wrong stuff in their warehouses.
yeah,
So there's really somewhat imbalance in a lot of organizations on saying, well, we have what we do not have, and we do not have what we actually do have, which sounds and feels really counterintuitive.
yeah, right. Yes. And we want to solve it with IT, and you see machine learning and AI. That's on topic. So basically, getting back to IT and the landscape, IT portfolios. Um, this visual I created, I think, already 5, 6, 7 years ago. Basically, when Gartner introduced the base layer application strategy, and basically what Gartner was explaining, I think you were probably working at Gartner at that time. So on the lower level, you have your system of records, you have your legacy systems, but also your ERP systems, and probably you have not one ERP system, but different instances. So that's your system of record, where you have uh, your sales orders and that kind of stuff. That's on the lowest level. So there you have your ERP environment. On the mid level, you have your system of differentiation, and basically what Gartner explained, there you have your planning systems, your SNOP, but also WMS, TMS. So that's your system of differentiation, how you can make a difference to your customer. And on the top layer, you have your system of innovation, where you have your apps, but basically also, and we'll talk about it later, you have your environment of startups and scale-ups. On a visibility part, we'll talk about that. Do you recognize this visualization on our side based on your Gartner framework?
Yeah, for sure. So I think this is kind of a picture that that we discussed multiple times. So yes, of course, I do recognize. Yeah.
All right, but now in the last 2-3 years, we see things evolving, and that's why I show this. And we created this visualization 2 years ago, and what we call a convergent planning tower. Why it's converging? It's getting, it will come together on the highest level at end to end. All kind of software vendors are talking. We are delivering end-to-end supply chain visibility or planning or whatever a solution. But basically, what I see is, it's like a building. You have the ground floor where your orders come in, your sales orders, and they will be administered in your first layer, your ERP layer. So that's where you get your sales orders. And the second floor, what we call in the last 2 years, sales and operation execution. Sometimes people ask me, do you have software for SNOE? I said no. That's basically your warehouse management system, your transport system, your scheduling system, your procure to pay system. Basically, where you translate your customer orders into transport, warehouse, or purchase orders or manufacturing orders. So that's SNOE. That's the short term. And then you have your SNOP. Well, that's midterm from 3 to 8 months onwards, where you're matching supply and demand. And on top of that, you have your IBP. I still think it's a different layer, because in that layer, the CFO is trusting you. The CFO doesn't have her own financial planning. It's integrated in one integrated business planning. So supply chain planning and financial planning is really integrated in one layer, and not just like SNOP in the supply chain world, where you still have talks about volumes and SKUs, whereas in IBP land you talk about euros, dollars, EBIT, and that area. And on top you have your end-to-end, and basically that's where you have the area of digital twins on supply chain networks. But what's very important, Peter highlighted already, you have on the market side, you have an environment where you need to have access to market demand, what's happening outside on social media, and with all kind of the things happening, doing yourself or what's happening to you on the market side, on the demand side. And on the supply side, upstream, you talk about raw materials, constraints, that kind of stuff. That's the supply market. So, and basically, this is a T-shaped tower of planning. And I think it's good to know these layers reflect that you also have layers on IT, and I think that's important to see. Um, and sometimes I say, one vendor has concurrent planning, and basically I explain you have an elevator shaft in the middle going from SNOP to SNOE and backwards, so you don't have to take the stairs. So basically, I can visualize, or I can position the different players like Kinexis, O9, OMP, and you name it, where they're good at in this planning tower, and that's very important, because in my opinion, you have to understand as a company, where are you at? Are you already building this planning tower, or are you still on the ERP level? You have to have layers on top of that, So that's my take. So Peter, what do you think of this kind of visualization of a planning tower as an expert in planning?
Yeah, so kind of I like the picture. So I think kind of what's interesting to see is that you have, I think, kind of in all of these layers, demand and a supply part of it. So I
Yep.
think really showed on the top, but I think it's quite obvious that you have it on all layers. I think kind of the key question also for this webinar is, so how do you kind of configure the system landscape to kind of have all these layers?
Yeah.
And kind of in the slides that I will present on the startups, I will also highlight, why do specific organizations also choose to use startups as part of that kind of configuration of different planning systems.
Yes. And
And
yeah, absolutely. Market demand, that's on the highest strategic level, so looking out
yeah,
far away. but you have your balconies on the left and the right hand side, and that's where also look at supply and demand. So you have to look out outside for forecasting on the short term with your own promotion, etc. You have your SNOP or your SNOE in that area. So basically it's kind of visualization where you can highlight where you are. And getting back to your point, uh, for building your IT portfolio, in the late 90s, we all know, we were all in awe and, in anxiety of year 2K, millennium problem. And we all implemented ERP in 1999. And then at the beginning of this century, we're still rolling out this ERP. So basically, in the supply chain area, and also outside, with the commercial and the procurement area and financial, we're still, busy with ERP. And now we see ERP going to the cloud, and we'll discuss it later. But basically, there's way more stuff beyond ERP. That's also the message of this slide. And as we see, and I'm the creator of this subway map. I've created this already. I think first one was 2012. So this is already I don't know. Keep on counting 12 or 13th version of it. So basically, this represents the European landscape of software vendors based on their implementations. So it's not what they are offering. Notice based on the number of implementations they have succeeded. So basically, it's a proof of what they are actually are able to do. And basically, to explain it in brief, and we'll get to this later. You have different software lines like ERP, WMS, TMS. SNOP, but also forecasting, scheduling, and new supply lines popping up. I will discuss it right after this. So basically, this is the whole landscape of this, and I base it on the input of all these vendors, and I also ask them who are your main competitors on each individual line. So based on that, you see a clustering. So you see below the river, the customized river, you see all kind of supply chain vendors who are now focusing on SNOP, whereas in the past they were advanced planning and scheduling. But you see clustering over there, and of course you SAP and Oracle at the center, and you have the American players like E2Open and Blue Yonder. And in the yellow line, you have your Aribas and Coupas of this world. So basically, there's a whole reasoning why these companies are being clustered. So and I get a lot of questions now. I thought I could do it all with ERP, and my answer is no, you can't, because basically it's getting too complex. And if you have different kind of supply chains, one supply chain doesn't fit all also mean one supply chain software type doesn't fit all. And if you have different kind of supply chain, it's very hard to configure this in one ERP system. And a lot of companies have put off their MRP runs and have different kind of ways of planning for that. All right. And now we get to new supply lines, and we get to the new flavors of the month. And I will highlight three areas because there's way too much. And we also want to talk with Peter about this startups and his uh, take on that. So basically, in 2021, or 2020, at the start of COVID, all companies needed visibility. And what kind of visibility? Very operational, especially real-time visibility on transportation. So basically, then you saw Forekites, Project 44 or P44, ShipPO popping up, raising a lot of money in investments. And we'll talk about later about investment. But Project 44 has raised $420 million, Forekites 241 from the US. And you look at ShipPO and Wakio from France. ShipPO has raised $40 million and Wakio $13 million. So that's something to do. But, a lot of money is being raised in that area. And that's what you see here. So this supply line didn't exist in a version of 2020. So basically, in the last few years, this supply line popped up and, was established. And a new flavor, in my opinion, is carbon accounting or sustainability reporting. How do you call it? So you see Sweep, Trust Rates, Pledge, and another few. Basically, as of next year, publicly traded companies in Europe, they have to do carbon accounting. So they have to have something to measure. So they need this kind of software. Otherwise, Deloitte, Accenture, PwC, and other accountants cannot approve their quarterly figures. So basically, all the publicly traded companies have to implement this kind of software to show what kind of carbon they're emitting, and also what are they proposing to reduce this, that kind of stuff. So this is the next one. And if and getting on investments, Sweep from France has raised 100 million euros in the last few years. Pledge $14.5 million. Sea Routes 2.4. So also a lot of money is being funded in that area. And then we come to the last part, and then we come to the part where Peter has been focusing on, especially last 2 years with some articles and interviews with some customers. So you see in the planning area, supply chain planning, S&OP, that kind of stuff, forecasting. You see new players popping up. A lot of them from France and Belgium, by the way. And all cloud applications. And Peter, so Peter, that's kind of new, that it's all cloud based.
Yes, and I will come back to that, let's say, in my presentation as well. Let's say why that's also interesting, let's say, for customers, and also why I think we see so many of these startups popping up in the different areas over time.
Yeah. So we get to that later, right after this. But it's good to see that there are also new flavors in supply chain planning, and supply chain is a broader scope. So S&OP is part of it, and forecasting, but there are different kind of flavors. So one thing is Locat from France. They are focusing on statistical forecasting, but also on probabilities. And lead times, and how are lead times changing, and what is the probability of change in lead times, and what does it mean for your supply chain planning. And especially in the last few years, we have seen that lead times have been changing a lot, and that has a huge impact on your supply chain planning. And Locat from Paris is one of the new flavors, that has a lot of knowledge in that area, and it's very mathematical, but very important. So that's one thing. So what we did, as Supply Chain Media, next to our IT supplement map we are creating every year on a European level, we also create a maturity matrix of supply chain startups and scale-ups. You see it here. So we have done it since 2018, also because we have an election in each year in May. So in the last 5 years, I've analyzed almost 300 supply chain startups in Europe, all software related, no hardware, only software related. And we created this overview from left to right, from supply side to customer side. So you have supplier management on the left, and supply chain sustainability on the left, and all the way to the right, you go to the last mile delivery. You have all kind of startups, and we also track down investment in that area. And you see a small dotted line, and that's the distinction between startups and scale-ups. And Peter will get back to that on that area. But you also see on the highlighted dotted areas in red, you see SQ Science, Genlots, Jarvis, and Garvis, and Flowlity, and these are the one Peter has analyzed, and we get right back to this. But what also is interesting to see is, of course, we have an election, like I said, every year, the European Supply Chain Startup Contest, and also a Scale-up Contest. And as you see, these very promising startups are coming from different areas. On the left side, you see Responsibly, a winner of last year, totally focusing on responsible supplying and sourcing. Ventori, winner of this year, has a very neat and innovative way of catching your inventory, not in a warehouse, but outside your warehouse, in stores, in back rooms, but also in the trunk of your car or in hospitals everywhere. So basically, Ventori is the one on that area. And Flowlity was a startup, but now is already evolved to a scale-up. Now getting back to you, Peter, and your part. So why should we look at startup? What can we learn from startup?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That's also what I will try to explain in a couple of slides that I've put together. And the first question was, so why do we want to talk about startups? And I think one of the key reasons that you already highlighted here, Martijn, is that we see a lot of startups popping up, right? So I think it's just interesting to look at them.
Mm-hmm.
But the second thing is that kind of if I look at let's say the supply chain technology market, so I think that everybody is well aware that there's a lot of developments in tech, so AI, ML. I think if I look at my own LinkedIn timeline, then I see every day all kind of new things about software vendors. So there's a very big promise.
Hmm.
While on the other hand, if I look at the companies that I work with, or if I am teaching my class every year at TIAS, then I see there's just a very big gap between where the majority of organizations are today, in terms of their digital maturity, however you would like to define that, versus where they would like to be.
Yeah.
Uh,
But all the companies are talking about innovation, talking about digitalization, AI, and machine learning. So obviously there's a huge need. So companies have to look and want to look at these new technologies and want to know how ChatGPT can help in supply chain planning, and how GTP4 can help applications in risk management. So there is an obvious need to look at it.
Yeah, and I think the need is twofold. So I think on the one hand, you already beginning of the call, you highlighted a couple of really big supply chain challenges.
Hmm.
And then we have not even talked about, let's say, the skill challenge or the people challenge, which is also, I think, probably something that supply chains have to deal with, or supply chain leaders have to deal with. So some of the questions, there is this promise, and there's this promise about technology, but also a challenge that we have in the supply chain. But the key question is, how do we get there? So,
Yep.
so I was kind of intrigued on, we have this kind of startup landscape, with all kind of companies that work on it.
Yep.
But what can we now learn from the companies who actually work with them? So
Yeah.
not so much talk to the tech startups themselves, but actually learn from, let's say, big supply chain companies on why they use startups and what we can learn from them while working with them. So that's kind of also the key objective of this presentation,
Yep.
where I do want to make a bit of a step back on, what is now a startup and what's a scale up, and also explain a bit on why it is so important. So maybe to start with, you already put it a bit in your slide, Martijn. So what are startups and what are scale-ups? So in principle, if you look at the definition, so a startup is just kind of a fast growing company
Hmm.
that is trying to fulfill a demand with kind of a new product. So based on a new technology or a new idea. So it typically starts with an idea that someone has, and an organization or a group of people try to bring that to market. And I think kind of the first phase, and that's why we typically call it a startup, is that organization is looking for a good product market fit. So should they be in retail? Should they be in manufacturing? So they try to find and try to translate that into an idea which is repeatable and scalable. Basically,
Yep.
that's what a startup is basically doing. And here in the picture, it's a straight line, but by experience, it's much more kind of a line with a lot of peaks and falls to get to that point.
Yep.
And actually, reality is also that I don't know how much, but a lot of startups don't make it to that tipping point, right? So I think that's also really a reality. And if you're at the tipping point, things go fast, right? So then you start to grow exponentially. Then you have really a market where you can grow, and things go fast. So maybe one thing to highlight here is that kind of that phase of startup. It looks here like a small time, but that could be up to 10 or 12 years. So if you look at, for example, Relax, which you have in your picture,
Yep.
but also online, it was not that they did this step in 1 or 2 years, but it took them, I don't know, 5 to 10 years to get to that point where they moved from a startup phase to a scale-up phase. So I think that's maybe a bit of context on what a startup is versus a scale-up.
Yeah, and scale up. O9 is yeah, at this moment, and Relax Solutions are established companies by now, and you
Yeah.
see that there is a lot of growth in that area. And also, what we do with the our analysis of supply chain startups and scale ups for our maturity matrix, and also for our election of the European supply chain startup contest, we ask them, what is the problem you are solving? And that is a hard question, and we be very specific. Don't come with a solution, we can solve everything and anything with AI and machine learning. That's not the point. I see the ones who are addressing a very specific problem, like Ventory, where you have remote inventory in your trunks, in your stores, and how to get that to the point and get an overview. Or I did a webinar last week with a company doing repairs and overhaul of windmills out in the desert, and you have to have your spare parts, and they have their spare parts everywhere in trunks, and all kind of areas where they can pick up their spare parts. There you don't have any warehouse management system with your inventory, so that Ventory is very specific what is the problem they're solving.
Yeah.
And well, that's from the definition of startup and scale up. So why is that? I already mentioned the investments in certain software. So what is the interest of investors to look at this kind of area in supply chain?
Yeah, indeed. So I try to look here a bit, let's say, for data, and this is kind of data from Besmers, which is a research which is published every year and kind of gives a bit of an idea of what kind of markets are interesting, let's say, for investors. And what you see here is that supply chain software, it's really on the top, or actually here on the bottom of this slide, as kind of from industry perspective, one of the most interesting areas and industries to invest in.
Yeah,
And on top, you see, of course, that AI machine learning as a topic is the most important topic. But from, let's say, from market perspective, supply chain software is seen as one of the most important areas to invest in. And I've been interviewing for a different project for investors over the last couple of weeks,
hmm
and I kind of asked them also for the why, and then kind of the things that come back on why they invest in startups, and also that's also why we see so many startups popping up, let's say in your research, Martijn, but also in the investment that you just mentioned.
hmm
Kind of what investors see is that there's just a very big market. So also based on the analysis that you showed, they say, well, here's the huge market where we can improve and where there's a real life problem. And the problem can be broken down into different topics, but they see a really huge opportunity in terms of market where they can do something.
yeah,
And that's based on the second thing is that they see that the supply chain market is really under digitized
yeah,
in their view. So they see that there's still a lot of manual work, there is still a lot of work in Excel, which they think that can be improved, right, from an investor perspective.
yeah,
And what technology is enabling is that we see more and more of ideas, so that they can actually translate it to a must-have product that a customer cannot do without. So the reason why investors are interested in supply chain is because just of the market size, the relatively low maturity and digitization of the supply chain market,
yep,
but also the ability to kind of define products which can actually help customers to and companies to actually do something with the technology which is appearing.
yeah. Yeah, no,
Does that make sense?
I totally concur. About supply chain software. That's a broad range. It's like all the software I positioned on my IT software map,
Yeah,
ranging from ERP or maybe except ERP, but WMS, TMS, etc. So real-time transport visibility has raised 1.4 billion euros or dollars, in the last 5 years. So that's huge. Um, Carbon accounting, it's already started just the last 2 years, has raised a 179 million euros alone. So that's big. Indeed, supply chain software is a broad range, and a lot have been invested and still will be invested in that area.
yeah.
So what is the customer view on all this?
Yeah, so this is a bit more of context. So kind of what I want to do now is kind of just take three cases. So we have interviewed multiples, but I just made a selection of three just to get a bit of an idea on, what kind of problems are these software vendors are actually addressing.
hmm
And then let's say the next slides I will also address a bit around, why did actually these big organizations chose to work with a startup. But also kind of what they give advice for other organizations, what they should pay attention to if they start to work with startups. But first start with, let's say, more the customer view. So here on this slide you see on the left side Saint-Gobain, which is a glass producer, Q8 a lubricants producer, and AB InBev, of course, known for beer, which all decided to work with a supply chain startup. So if I look at Saint-Gobain, which is a glass producer, and there we talked about, let's say, the aftermarket. Where Saint-Gobain saw is that globally they have spent a lot in S&OP, so they have a global S&OP platform, they have also kind of S&OP processes, but they are kind of struggling in the operational planning world. So I think kind of you mentioned, Martijn, there's not really specific S&OP software, so there's all kind of different things. But the challenge of Saint-Gobain was to say, well, we have all kind of operational demand issues. So we have unseen demand popping up, we have all kind of supply disruptions, and we are doing that with Excel, but the world is so complex that we cannot handle that anymore in Excel, and they want to get much more visibility and the ability also to take better decisions for demand and supply planning.
And
And
yeah, and maybe on top of that, what I know of Flowity, it's like a SaaS product of
yeah,
forecasting as a service. And basically, what they've done with Saint-Gobain, that you have Saint-Gobain itself, but also the sister company supplying
yes.
the Saint-Gobain and the tier one supplier, all in one planning environment, operational planning environment.
Indeed. So they started with, let's say, the demand side. So to say, well, we just want to get rid of Excel and we want to do better forecasting. Then they said we want to move it into replenishment, so replenishment of the warehouses. They are now connecting that, let's say, to their internal suppliers.
Yeah.
And later on, they will also connect that to their first tier suppliers. So it really becomes on the operational planning an integrated solution over different parts of the supply chain.
And basically, Floaty gives recommendations where to put which kind of inventory where in these three parts of the supply chain.
Yeah, so basically what it's doing, it's called resilient planning. So it's much more kind of a philosophy on to take much more a probabilistic approach to forecasting. So I think that is one.
Yep.
And secondly, it's also giving a kind of replenishment recommendations, and then doing also the alignment with suppliers and creating also visibility, let's say, much more between the enterprise and the supplier on what the supplier will need to produce when. So,
Yeah.
so I think that it's a bit of a combination of everything.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So that's more on the Flowity side, and Saint-Gobain. Then moving to Q8. So Q8 is producing lubricants, which basically always has been a very stable business.
Yep.
And then COVID hit, and then kind of the whole supply chain got out of balance. So they needed to move, let's say, from a model where they used for their finished products min-max levels to a model where they needed to get much better insight into their demand planning. So that's why they started with Garvis, so really on the demand planning side. And it was kind of also kind of a really pragmatic approach, where I think kind of the key thing that they really liked that within a couple of days they could actually start. So they had nothing, right? So they had no forecasting, and they want to move very quickly to insights into to what the market was doing as kind of an input for, let's say, the MVP process. So this was really driven by, let's say, changes in the marketplace to basically get better insights into what was happening at the commercial side.
And Garvis also is known for a rapid implementation on one hand, but also using a lot of machine learning AI to translate external data from Nielsen or whatever into a forecast.
Yeah, yeah, and I think kind of I'm not 100% sure on how they did this, but I think kind of what they did is they started with small steps. So I'm not sure if they directly embedded, let's say, the external data,
Mm-hmm.
but quite quickly, let's say within a couple of days, they could start, and kind of they took much more kind of a continuous improvement approach to every week kind of do something new and extend the model and also extend the number of SKUs that they took into their demand planning scope.
Yeah, yeah. On Garvis, we did a webinar with Garvis and also Jacob Douwe Egberts, the coffee manufacturer. And basically how Jacob Douwe Egberts used Garvis is let this engine recognize the promotion and the impact of the promotion on demand. So basically, you have a lot of you have your base planning and your base demand, but you have your promotion with your retail stores, and you have your spikes. So basically, Garvis is recognizing with AI and machine learning the spikes of promotion and position it on your forecast, so you have a better feeling and a more realistic view of what's happening in the world based on promotions and other things outside the regular demand.
Yeah.
All right.
Then move to the last one, so AB InBev. So I think if you look at beer production, of course, it's large batches or it's continuous production of beer, and I think kind of the biggest issue there is to have the right packaging materials, so the right tins or the right bottles in let's say in stock to produce what the customer really wants their product in, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, there the challenge was that because they don't want to get out of stock, they always had very high stock levels, which was kind of more or less accepted to some point to the level that at some point of time interest rates started to increase, and they wanted to do something with their with the inventory levels while not kind of compromising, of course, on the service level. So they started to work with Genbots, and basically what they did is said, well, for a planner, we don't want them to see anything else. So they have their homemade, let's say, replenishment system or their planning system. And what they did is they used Genbots really as kind of a backend to have a much better algorithm to do their replenishment planning towards their suppliers. to kind of lower their inventory of their packaging materials. So
And
they don't do.
yeah. One thing is, in the beer world, you have Heineken had a lot of overstocked inventory of tin cans. Basically, in the Netherlands, since recently, you get a deposit, a financial deposit, and you get it back when you deliver this. But Heineken had too much overstock of all tin cans. So they were not delivering the tin cans for deposit, but the old ones, and that was a buzz and a fuzz in the Netherlands.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And I think kind of the interesting thing of this case is, so I think Genlots in itself has kind of probably a bigger app or a bigger solution, but they really specifically chose only to use kind of the algorithm to kind of support their planners, with kind of the effect that the number of kind of changes that planners make to their recommendation message to their suppliers, it was kind of dramatically going down, while the planners were really not really aware that something else happened on the back end. So I think that's kind of the interesting part of this case.
And it's interesting to see that there's a real pain point, a specific pain point being addressed with this Genlots application,
Yeah.
and then it's also much more easier to roll it out across a company. But maybe you
Exactly.
can summarize what is the business case for this kind of application for these kind of multinationals.
Yeah, indeed, that's a good question. So, kind of, you could ask yourself the question: so, why do these organizations start to work with startups and don't use kind of different vendors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they are not there, so that's also kind of reality. But sometimes they could, and I think that I kind of come up based on the interview with 6 reasons on why they like to work with startups. And the first one is just kind of vision and innovation. So I think if you look at all of those cases, so it comes with new ideas, either being kind of a new algorithm or what you've also shown Martijn, kind of in the webinar with Carvis around ChatGPT, or the case of Flowlity with kind of the collaboration over the different parts of the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a very visionary and innovative thing in the solution that is attracting the big organizations to work with them.
Mm-hmm.
The second reason is that I already explained that these startups are really kind of at the beginning of their journey, right? So they have this idea, they try to bring it to market, which also a lot of times means that they do not really have a full solution yet, and that these organizations kind of go into a co-creation mode to jointly develop that solution, which is of course the benefit of the big organization, because they can really address issues that are really specific for them. And for the startup, it's really interesting because they can learn from this big organization on what they would like to have in a solution, right? So that's kind of more the co-creation part. Then there's also something around support, so of the founders and the team, and kind of the things and the word that I heard on those interviews where they're energetic, they're engaging, they're really service oriented. And sometimes these big organizations have the feeling that if they work with a big software vendors, that they don't feel the same kind of energy and the same kind of support and engagement that they find in working with the founders and the teams of startups.
Yeah.
Another one, which is maybe a bit kind of more basic, is also kind of pricing. So as you were mentioning, a lot of these solutions are SaaS models, which means that you do not need any investment, but you can just buy a subscription basically, which is easier to do. It's less expensive, so a lot of times these supply chain managers, they don't have to go through difficult approval flows in the organization, which takes time. And they also don't have to go to a kind of, if they work with a startup, to go to a very long selection process. So they can start really quickly and already, if they don't like it, they can stop basically because of the SaaS model, but they can just experiment within their own level of control, and they can kind of work and innovate, within their own level of control, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
Then the fifth reason is just speed. So we already mentioned the example of Carvis. So really within a couple of days, they can already deploy. But there's also a level of flexibility. So a lot of the problems that we have been discussing, sometimes the organizations also just don't know yet what they want to go to, but they don't know the solution themselves. So they don't want to buy something which is already fixed, but they want to have the flexibility to learn and to experiment, and then also sometimes to change things. And then really specifically, so a lot of these startups also have really specific knowledge, so either be it sector knowledge or technology knowledge that these big organizations really would like to buy into, right? So it's a bit of a mix of something really new, but also something really pragmatic, saying, well, if we buy a product which is really cheap, then we can keep it within our own authority, and then we can decide ourselves if we want to use it, yes or no.
Yeah. And apart from sector knowledge, it is also a lot of supply chain knowledge on algorithms and that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
LOCAT, with the probabilistic planning, that kind of stuff. So what are
indeed.
the drawbacks, or maybe what are the tips for possible users?
Yeah, maybe the word drawback is a bit too black and white, I would say, Martijn, but I think kind of what the recommendations of all of these organizations we talk to is that they say, well, just try to experiment, right? So it's really good to also open yourself up to these new things and also have trust kind of in these startups to kind of get the learnings from what they kind of show you, right? And of course, with that, if you experiment, you also need to make sure that you also deploy this fast improvement cycle, because you don't know if it's working well. So, and it doesn't have to be right first time, but you have to make sure that you can improve very fast. So that I think that's really important. But what they also say is, well, there is this dream of a startup, right? So they have this big idea, and then basically they start with nothing. So there's a risk that you dream too much, right? And you need to remain pragmatic, and you need to move into small steps to really kind of deliver specific results.
Yep.
And that also links back a bit to the comment you just made, Martijn. So the more specific a solution is, for the easier also it is for a customer to understand what it will be the benefit of them. And with that, it's always a trade-off between costs. What are my expenses to work with a startup? How much time do I invest it in myself? And what is the risk that I'm taking that nothing will really come out of it? So it's a bit of experimentation, but also try to be really pragmatic, which also means something a bit on the IT approach. So you showed the picture, let's say, of your the different levels of the building,
Hmm.
and we discussed on how we would like to go with that. And I think there's two things to mention here. So these organizations quite interestingly, they reserve specific budget for experimentation. So if they make their IT roadmap for the next year, they say, well, maybe 90% we're going to dedicate to projects, but we also want to have 10% or 5% to experiment with new things. And it also means that, let's say, for the vendor strategy, so I come with a lot of organizations that say, well, we have one IT solution and we want to do everything with one. You have to move a bit to, okay, but actually in our landscape, we might want to use different vendors. So it will not be one, but we have to work with multiple, and we have to make the connection between multiple.
And one thing, one comment I hear, 4 or 5 years ago, from a large consultancy firm, they say, rolling out an application from a startup, so deploying it worldwide could be a hassle, could be a challenge. Do you agree?
Yeah, yes, of course, because kind of a lot of times these organizations are pretty small still, so they can kind of deliver what they can with the current team. But if you, for example, if you want to move from 2 sites to 20 all of a sudden,
Yeah.
they typically do not have the resources directly to do it as quickly as you would like to have. So I will not say that they cannot, but it will take probably time, and it will go probably a bit slower than kind of the first phase that you have gone through.
Yeah.
Then maybe the last comment on this slide, and also my comment is that, of course, you are buying something which is probably an algorithm or something quite complex. So it's really important that you start to understand how the solution is working. So of course it's obvious to do a proof of concept. So to learn and to experiment and to learn what's coming out of it. But it's also really important to overthink. How would you like to deploy it, and how can it support also the main decisions that you have to take into the supply chain.
Yeah. Getting to the next point, taking the understanding of the solution. I get a lot of questions on how to select supply chain software, and basically what I see, a lot of companies are using still all kind of questions, a long list of questions about functionality. But basically, what I'm saying, you have to have a different kind of perspective when you are selecting software vendors. So basically, this is what I created as a guideline for companies selecting supply chain software or software, any kind of software. So basically, functionality is only one part. You have 4 dimensions, in my opinion. So on the upper left, that's functionality. So you can see what you'll have to look at. But basically, people are copying all kind of functionality lists and sending it out to the vendors, and they hate it because this list of functionality is getting longer and longer, and more obvious, stupid questions you will get. So functionality is one part. the right hand side, the upper right side is the technology. Is it in the cloud and kind of stuff, that kind of stuff. So what is the language being written in and that kind of stuff? That's technology, also very important. Getting into the cloud. But one of the two most forgotten elements, one is delivery or implementation. So, what is the speed of implementation? Who is implementing? And if it now is startup or established one, okay, how do they do that? Do they themselves? Do they have implementation partner like Accenture or Capgemini, etc.? So that's the implementation part. Very, very important because with GTP4, I can imagine in the next 5 years, you don't need a busload of junior consultants to implement an ERP system. Just two of them, and then learn, train GTP4, and GTP4 will do the rest. So that is my feeling for the next 5 years. But the most forgotten part is domain expertise, or call it knowledge, about inventory management of spare parts, like inventory, or like flowability of operational planning. So the knowledge part is most of the time forgotten. What are they doing? Do they work together with university, etc., to get in touch of the newest findings in academic and that kind of stuff? How do you see this, Peter, in the whole spectrum of your solution of startups and the established ones?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that kind of when we talk to the let's say to the startups, of course we also ask the question about let's say the selection process,
Hmm.
and actually kind of they mentioned that there was not really a selection process, but it was really kind of based on trust, and I think, but if you would break it down, it's actually trust, let's say in these four areas. So trust in the functionality, in the technology, in the knowledge which you also saw back, but also in the delivery, and specifically also in the team. So I think this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Um, we're getting to the final part of the webinar and the Q&A, and we have an extra 30 minutes beyond 5 o'clock CET. So basically, what we see now, that there's a huge need of more kind of scenario planning, and that's lacking in a lot of systems. And software vendors are developing this kind of scenario planning. So basically, that's the message of this slide. So there's a lot of software available, and basically look at the customer reviews and look at what actually companies who are using the software are saying is really fulfilling the promise of the software vendor. So that's about the customer review. That's one thing. And another thing is do demos. Ask for live demos. PowerPoint, forget about it. Live demos, and then you recognize if it's working fine. And another thing is that a lot of companies are feeling hijacked because they are sitting in an ERP straitjacket. And this is a slide by McKinsey earlier this year. And facade is what they call it, but basically I would call it a data lake or a data layer. So you have your own ERP system on premise, partly in the cloud. Leave it be, and create a data lake. And on top of that, you are able to implement startup applications way more quickly. That's what Henkel has been doing since 2018, I think. With a data lake, they are able to move much quicker. Um, so this, even McKinsey wrote about it, but the term facade seems like fake, but facade, in my opinion, is a data lake, and this is how you get rid of the ERP straitjacket, and this is how you becoming more resilient by the ability to implement applications more quickly. Wrapping up, when you choose software, it's like choosing a business car. These are the one on premise, the established ones on our IT software map. They are on premise, so you have different kind of cars and feelings. But do try it out. Do ask for live demos. No PowerPoint. Ask for references of live customers, and ask for the technology roadmap. But next to the fuel engine cars, we have the electric ones. Those are the ones in the cloud. You have the innovators, the startups and scale-ups. So you can recognize the different kind of you see the more innovative on the upper right side, new market disruptors. But are you ready for that kind of environment or not? Or are you ready anyway for a SaaS and a cloud solution? So that's are you ready for machine learning? Are you ready for the exchange of external data? Like, you have the Tesla with the overnight exchange of internal data and upgrades. Are you ready for that? Do you have risk of startup stage vendors? That kind of stuff. So these are some recommendations about how to get there. And final slide, match your maturity with the supply chain software. So you don't want to have a purple Lamborghini and within 100 meters you will hit the road and hit a signpost. So basically, are you able to use the new kind of software as you have implemented? Um, so basically, we are already at the end of this. So I have asked a lot of questions. I see some questions popping up here. But I would like to invite you to keep it within an hour. I would like to invite you, if you have some more questions to Peter or myself, please join us in the virtual lounge. So basically, click on a chair on the table one, and I will be there. Here you see the right hand side, the IT Supermarket you can go to. It's interactive and you can download it. And on the right hand side, it's the website of Peter. Peter, thank you for joining me. It was great to have you here, and great explanation about how you explained the value of supply chain startups.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Martijn.
All right, and to the audience, thank you for watching, and maybe you see the recording. Thank you for watching it on YouTube, and I hope to see you again next time. So in the next weeks we have a summer break. I hope you have the same, and I hope to see you in the next webinar, or I would hope to see you in the virtual lounge with the after talk with Peter and myself. So thanks for now. See you next time, and bye bye.